University of Glasgow in 2009 and has published and presented widely about Georgian and Victorian music in Britain. So what we're going to do now is actually see a recording of Karen's presentation. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Karen McAulay from the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland. I'm delighted to be giving this talk today. I shall be speaking over a PowerPoint, so excuse me while I just get the picture up on the screen. I was in the third final year of a secondment to an AHRC-funded research project when I received an invitation to take a look at the copyright music collection at the University of St Andrews in October 2014. Although I was vaguely aware that the collection was there, I knew little at that point about the United Kingdom's early legal deposit arrangements set up in 1710 as part of the Queen Anne Copyright Act. The legal deposit of music didn't really catch on much until the last couple of decades of the 18th century. St Andrews' 423 bound volumes contain thousands of separate pieces of late 18th and early 19th century sheet music. Thus, they represent a broad cross-section of what music was being published at the time, with the caveat that not all music publishers saw fit to fulfill their legal deposit obligations. This is in no sense the only caveat that I shall be flagging up. Some self-publishing composers, such as Scottish compilers of fiddle tunes for dancing, plainly saw no need to register their books at Stationers' Hall. On the other hand, some publishers and self-publishing composers were very diligent. The music would have arrived unbound in St Andrews from London. It was collected by the university and, starting in the early 19th century, later sorted and bound. Of course, we do not know what, if anything, was discarded prior to binding, and a few bound volumes have gone missing in the passage of time. I refer to this material as the Cinderella of Stationers' Hall because, let's face it, sheet music of single songs, piano variations, and harp music were not the stuff that the universities really valued from their legal deposit entitlements. Music wasn't a taught subject. What they really wanted were learned tomes on mathematics, science, law, and theology. Once I had finished the research secondment that I was already involved with, my own personal secondment as a researcher was extended a bit longer, so I turned my attention to the history and contents of the St Andrews Copyright Music Collection. These volumes are itemized in a 2-volume handwritten catalogue dating from 1826, which was compiled by the adult niece of a late professor who had himself been involved with the library committee. This catalogue would have shown borrowers what was bound in the individual volumes. Miss Lambert's cataloguing was neat and functional, essentially a hand list, with no details other than composer and title, and sometimes conflated entries for multi-part works. There are records of this catalogue actually being signed out by readers, obviously to assist with someone's choice of music borrowing. There's a detailed, typed inventory of the entire contents of the collection listed by an earlier researcher, Elizabeth Ann Frame, who taught in the University Music Department towards the end of the 20th century. This inventory is contained in 6 boxes and would subsequently have been drawn upon when the greater part of the collection was catalogued online, thanks to retrospective cataloguing funding at the start of the present century. However, here we come to the next caveat. The remainder of the retrospective online cataloguing is currently still an ambition, as is the intention to trace any items that were disbound and removed to other shelves or collections by a well-intentioned professor between 1947 and 1982. This fabulous, well-preserved collection is therefore neither complete in terms of preservation nor in terms of online documentation. And I struggle with the dichotomy that the professor, who was highly regarded, highly capable and gifted in very many ways, a prominent figure in mid-20th century Scottish higher education, an author and a composer, at the same time innocently made things difficult for future scholars by disbinding, rebinding and relocating some of the music. I should add that he was also a very competent bookbinder, if that's any consolation. The music was borrowed not only by professors and a very few students, mostly young teenage boys at the time, but also by the professors' friends. St Andrews archives hold the university's Georgian and Victorian borrowing records, allowing us to see exactly who borrowed what and when. We can piece together some details about how exactly the materials were borrowed. It appears that the professor signed out music on behalf of these friends, a cross-section of middle-class music lovers from the town and surrounding neighbourhood, with quite a lot of misses, but also married women, male friends, clergymen, and retired military men, some of whom had served in the East India Company. Towards the end of these legal deposit arrangements, more married women were borrowing and fewer unmarried ones. A genealogist could probably establish whether any of the early enthusiastic lady musicians were now married and borrowing under their married name, but I stopped short of investigating that. I've transcribed every loan of music from 1801 to 1840 and have experimented with big data type analysis along the lines of calculating which volumes were the most borrowed at different periods, which borrowers borrowed most at different periods, and whether certain categories of music were more popular, such as instructional material or songs, or an extraordinary volume containing songs by women and songs about the Napoleonic Wars. Here's another caveat, though. The bound volumes are dedicated to certain genres to a certain extent, but it's mostly impossible to say which individual items were most popular. A few bound volumes contain larger national song collections by commonly known names, but they are the exceptions. Otherwise, there could be 60 songs or 20 sets of piano variations in a book. Furthermore, even the most detailed music cataloguing tends not to index the subject matter of songs, and not everyone indexes both the title and the first line of a song. So unless the theme is obvious from the title, there's a limit to how far such a statistical analysis can go. One doesn't know whether Volume 40 was borrowed for its Napoleonic songs or because it contained a number of songs by women composers. Similarly, drilling down to investigate which instructional books were popular with whom can only tell us so much unless the bound volume is dedicated to a particular instrument, subject, or a single fat publication. Neither can we tell with any certainty whether newly bound volumes attracted particular attention, since we don't know the detailed history of binding consignments. For a different analysis, I used Michael Cassler's bibliography, Music Entries at Stationers' Hall, 1710 to 1818, in conjunction with Miss Lambert's 1826 catalogue, as well as what was catalogued online, to ensure I had traced all compositions by women. The late 20th century type listing was temporarily missing during my research, but it has since been located. One does not realize how much we benefit from online catalogues until forced to use paper catalogues in the absence of a modern entry. Since St Andrews was only one of a number of legal deposit libraries in this era, this raised the question as to what the others did with the music they were entitled to. An AHRC grant enabled me to pursue this further by founding the Claimed from Stationers' Hall research network. I reached out to librarians, music scholars, historians, and big data experts who attended a workshop, explored their own collections, and welcomed me as a visitor. At the end of the funded period, we were graciously permitted to publish our findings as the entire issue of BRIO, the Journal of the UK and Ireland branch of the International Association of Music Libraries, in autumn-winter 2019. This was volume 56, number 2. Normally only available online to members, this issue is available in its entirety via my page on the RCS Open Access Research Repository, Pure. 9 libraries were initially entitled to legal deposit materials, and later 11 when Trinity College Dublin and King's Inns Library, also in Dublin, were awarded the same privilege. On the face of it, I had discovered so much about the St Andrews collection that the opportunity to investigate the other copyright libraries might have been expected to yield untold riches. My hopes were not exactly dashed, but my expectations certainly had to be adjusted. It has been suggested in Barrington Partridge's The History of the Legal Deposit of Books, a 1937 Library Association Fellowship and Honours Diploma thesis, that Scottish universities did well out of the legal deposit arrangements, partly as a goodwill gesture after the Act of Union in 1707. Initially intending the Edinburgh-based Advocates' Library to receive such books, the legislators added in the universities of Aberdeen, Edinburgh, Glasgow, and St Andrews. Meanwhile, in England, copies went to the British Museum, Oxford, Cambridge, and what was effectively a social club for London clergy, Sion College. Modern catalogues were obviously going to be a prime research tool, enabling the Claimed from Stationers Hall network to explore what survives to the present day. However, it soon became apparent that not all libraries retained or even claimed music that was registered at Stationers Hall. Furthermore, early 21st century funding for retrospective online cataloguing failed to cover all the surviving music. In the early 19th century, Aberdeen and Edinburgh sold some of their music entitlement, though Aberdeen certainly has more survivors bound and identifiable as a legal deposit collection. It is hard to identify some of Edinburgh's legal deposit music. Physically examining bindings, noting previous shelf locations, and eliminating any bound volumes with ownership marks become crucial in attempting to unravel the mysteries. Like St Andrews, both libraries still have outstanding cataloguing to be done online. Glasgow and St Andrews seem to have collected more systematically, and Glasgow's music is all catalogued online. Meanwhile, the Advocates' Library music ended up in the National Library of Scotland. But we know that the early 19th century advocates didn't curate it particularly carefully. Again, like Edinburgh University, it's hard to tell which music arrived via the legal deposit route or by other means. But a major step forward in documentation is being taken with the NLS Retro Conversion project to digitise various music catalogues, including the old Victorian catalogue, a charming but frustrating catalogue compiled on slips, according to cataloguing rules initially devised by the British Museum, the forerunner to the British Library. Despite the corona situation, the scans of 13 different catalogues are now available publicly at https://digital.nls.uk/music-card-catalogue/. It has been reported that some ingest testing into the online catalogue has taken place, and large batch ingests are expected to happen soon. The full virtual card catalogue that staff are working with includes a useful search function, but for a number of reasons is not currently available to the public. Meanwhile, the British Museum's early music cataloguing was done by volunteers, as it was in the Advocates' Library, and entries can be sketchy. Sketchy manual records inevitably lead to sketchy online ones in any retroconversion project, unless the items are completely recatalogued with the music in hand. However, the British Museum/Library holdings are at least represented online despite their skeletal nature. And that leaves 3 other English libraries: Oxford Bodleian, Cambridge, and Sion College. Oxford has done a retroconversion project comparatively recently, whilst Cambridge still has a backlog of uncatalogued materials, and Sion College no longer exists. Essentially a social club for clergy, it struggled financially for years, selling off library stock to raise funds from time to time. What remains is now at Lambert Palace, but there seems to be virtually no music. At Trinity College Dublin, their London agent was instructed not to collect legal deposit music, whilst King's Inns, a legal library, does have a little more music from this era, but it could have acquired it all via donations from readers. The sum total of this unfortunate history is that one cannot confidently check JISC Library Hub Discover for a title, certain that nothing has been left out. There could be copies of any particular title at Aberdeen, Edinburgh, St Andrews, the NLS, or Cambridge, as yet undiscernible online, but awaiting the magic touch of a fairy godmother in the shape of a rare books cataloguer. Moreover, through sheer serendipity, we discovered something quite unexpected. When I visited Oxford, we came across composer Sarah Alison Hewitt's name in one of a handful of bound volumes, which had been fetched for me to inspect. But it transpired that, whilst the music was certainly bound, it had not been catalogued. This was not the only instance, so here we have evidence of women's compositions being effectively disappeared due to the decisions of an early cataloguer. Omissions identified can be rectified, but we may never know how often this happened. Again, this means that a particular work might be bound in a legal deposit volume, but untraceable through catalogues. Inspired by a British Library big data project looking at British music published over the centuries, I had aspirations for a big data analysis of surviving legal deposit music. However, the incomplete availability of automated catalogue records means that this ambition is currently not feasible, although, as I've demonstrated, cataloguing is still being updated and the time may come when such a project can be revisited. Similarly, the St Andrews early circulation data makes for interesting statistics, but until the entire corpus is catalogued, we are only seeing one side of the picture, since we cannot see the fullest details of what was in each bound volume. Moreover, there are no similar loan statistics in other libraries. St Andrews may indeed have been unique in facilitating such widespread music borrowing, so admirably suited to a comparatively remote community. My research demonstrates the value of library cataloguing metadata not only in enabling readers to trace particular publications, but also for exploring a large corpus of music that was originally accepted by libraries almost as a byproduct of considerably less importance than the learned tomes which the universities were keen to claim for their students' and professors' use. This research project could not have been done without extensive use of primarily online library catalogues. The detail in those catalogues has a very direct impact on the depth to which the repertoire can be explored. I've already alluded to the fact that the first line of a song may be different to its title. Furthermore, we tend not to index the subject matter of individual songs in everyday cataloguing, but this can be significant in cataloguing rare music. Sometimes a group of songs or piano variations may have been bound together for thematic reasons, not immediately apparent to the modern cataloguer. In Edinburgh, for example, it looked as though some pieces survived because they commemorated events of national significance. The research also highlighted the importance of data about physical aspects of both individual items, whether a composer's signature on a legal deposit copy, a library stamp denoting the item's origin in a copyright collection, one or more previous shelf marks, or indeed indication of provenance other than through legal deposit. The indexing in published resources proved also to be crucial. Michael Cassler's music entries at Stationers' Hall bibliography was invaluable, but the absence of a title and/or publisher index made searching more arduous. With multiple page numbers for prolific composers in the author index, much time was spent flicking between individual pages, whilst the online version of the book had limitations due to the limitations of searching more than one word at a time in a PDF. The right-hand picture on this slide is one of the indexes from Cassler's book. It comes down to a question of metadata. Furthermore, the history of this bibliography's compilation does explain why the listing ended in 1818. It's due to the availability of a historical hand-copied listing. But it didn't help in terms of researching a repertoire that was more widely disseminated prior to legislative changes in 1838, a full 20 years later. Notwithstanding all the caveats, the unclaimed, the missing, and the sold music, the inadequately catalogued, not yet catalogued, or not yet catalogued online repertoire, the claimed from Stationers' Hall network resulted in the comprehensive documentation, not only of the current status quo, but also of the history of this originally often unwanted legal deposit material. Its presence has been highlighted with profile-raising papers, articles, blog posts, and social media activity. We have also underlined the urgency of completing the online cataloguing so that the repertoire can be explored in many more ways. But most importantly, there is a clear, renewed commitment to making this corpus of music more accessible, most visibly and recently by the National Library of Scotland's retrospective catalogue digitisation project, but also amongst the university libraries. Indeed, you could say that Cinderella has at last made it to the ball. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Sorry, just got confused by something that appeared on my screen then. That was fascinating. Thank you so much for that. I just wanted to ask, actually, do we have any idea what the scale of this sort of problem of under-description is for music scores and for music resources?
Possibly not. I mean, I've only looked at the legal deposit music, and that doesn't account for all the other stuff that got into libraries, which wasn't through the legal deposit route. So I really couldn't say.
Oh, it just struck me that I think there's a lot of work going on around trying to identify collections, types of materials that maybe, as you say, they are Cinderellas, but they certainly do deserve their time at the ball. So I just wondered if there was anything within the music community that gave an indication of the amount of materials there were to be worked on.
I'm not sure. I mean, in my own job, where I've been for a very long time, but I spent a number of years working through donations that had accumulated over decades. And I used to sit and think, when I finished doing my retrospective cataloguing, are they going to finish with my services? But somehow it didn't work out that way. However, we have got through the retrospective cataloguing, so there isn't, apart from just a couple of shelves, there really isn't a big backlog in my own institution, but we're comparatively small compared to a university library, and everyone's situation is going to be different.
Yes, indeed. Well, I'm glad to say you've obviously inspired people with this talk. You certainly inspired me, because I had lots of things going around in my mind. But we've had some questions in, so I'd like to put these to you now, if that's okay. So I've got one from Martin. He says, in terms of scores omitted from cataloguing, do you think there was a tendency to omit women composers in particular, or is the selectivity on a different basis, or just unclear?
I think it's the last option, actually. It's just unclear. When we only discovered this because we were looking for one particular woman, and we couldn't find her catalogue record to go with the music in the book. I might add, it's really no great loss to the world that we can't find this particular piece of music. But I think after I had left and they looked at some more volumes, they found some other women who hadn't been catalogued either. But it's one of these things where, you know, it's like going to the beach. You don't know how many shells are in a pool because they're underneath the water. So, you know, I don't think there can ever be you can't put a number on an answer like that.
No. And I suppose it's quite similar to women artists. In certain periods, they were automatically deemed not to be as good as men. So why bother attributing work to them? I suppose there could have been a little bit of an element of that as well at the same time. Yeah.
And I also know from that the publisher Boosey and Hawkes, right at the beginning of the 20th century, they're actually on record, although I don't have the page numbers or where, but I read about it in a book about women composers, as saying, oh, well, I'll take little songs from women, but that's about it.
Little songs, right.
Yeah, but we don't want anything big or a symphony or a piano concerto or anything. No, just little songs will do. So, I mean, in that case, they were getting filtered out before they even got started, really.
Yes, quite. And I've got another question here from Vaso. She says, we would like to have the details from the last slides.
Did I not put up a bibliography on the last?
Yes.
Slide? Is it possible to get that back? Or?
Yes, we'd be able to post those links. Sorry, I should have. I mean,
I can try and find it, and I can send you that slide on its own, and then maybe you could share it later in the afternoon.
Yeah, or you could drop the links in via chat on here if you want.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, when we have the next break, I'll see if I can extract that single slide. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And she just makes the observation that cataloguing sheet music scores is very time consuming.
It is.
Yes. Oh, right. Okay. Well, there was another question I wanted to ask you actually, and that was, you mentioned the fact that quite often there wouldn't be any indication of the subject matter of the song. And I just wondered, is that, so if someone was cataloguing modern music collections now, would they actually put that information in the record? You have to excuse my ignorance. I've never catalogued music.
Well, until comparatively recently, when we've been using downloading shared records, we didn't put in my own institution, we didn't put that many subject entries in the 650 field relating to the subject matter, of a song. We didn't do that. It's something that perhaps only becomes relevant when you find yourself looking at a corpus like this that goes back a long way. I mean, I was looking at the volumes that Edinburgh had, and I suddenly thought, hang on a minute, there's another funeral being commemorated. And then suddenly there were more things like that. And it's not enough to say I've made a great big discovery, because I was only looking at a comparatively small batch of books. But nonetheless, it seemed significant that these things were jumping out at me as all being sort of related just because of the kind of thing they were. As I said, now we download records. You find the most elementary things like symphonic music or songs, orchestral arrangements of, or whatever. So you can find that kind of thing, which is quite useful for a borrower who'll come in saying, I want to have songs accompanied by orchestra. I don't just want song and piano, voice and piano. So it's quite helpful if you can pull it out that way. But no, ordinarily you wouldn't be saying, I mean, yes, I always put in, if it's a Christmas thing, or if it's a Robert Burns thing, or if it's Scottish songs, then because they're things that I know people are going to ask for, then I always have indexed those. But not everything, just the things that I know crop up frequently. But special collections cataloguing is a thing entirely different. And in the conservatoire, because we're comparatively small, I'm afraid we become jack of all trades. And I don't catalogue all the time. I catalogue quite a bit of it, but not all of it. So it's not quite the same as being a dedicated special collections cataloguer, where you're used to looking for every little detail and entering it all in the correct places. We don't do it that way because we don't have that much stuff. We still do a pretty good record, but it's not like a rare books catalogue record.
Okay, that's great. Well, I think we've got time for one more very quick question. And Anastasia says, it would be lovely if we also knew which events the music was used for over time. Did anyone leave pencil marks on it when they borrowed it, I wonder?
Well, I didn't see any. I know that at St Andrews, a big project has been done about the markings that students put in their textbooks, but this is not the same readership that I'm talking about. I mean, I had a lot of, I know they were miss this and miss that, so I know that initially it was unmarried ladies of whatever age, and that later on, as I said, there were more married ladies. So, but they didn't tend to write on their music, whereas the young boys who borrowed textbooks would write quite frank comments about their lecturers and tutors and about each other and what they thought of each other. I can't claim to have found anything exciting like that. What I did find was that one young male student, initially I discovered that he had borrowed hundreds of scores. Well, was it hundreds? Maybe 100. Anyway, his borrowing was way, out of the ballpark compared to anybody else. But then later on, reading something completely different, and I can't even remember where I found it, I discovered that his mother used to have a lot of social events and at-homes. So there's every possibility that he was borrowing this music for his mother to use at her musical at-homes.
But
I can't say it for sure. It's simply conjecture, but when it was the only boy who was borrowing large quantities of stuff, compared to the odd handful here and there from the others, then to discover his mother was a social hostess who had musical evenings was kind of, it was coincidental, but it would make a nice story. But it's too dangerous to conjecture.
Yeah.
You don't know who borrowed anything for what. If a professor borrowed it, could have been for his wife, could have been for his daughter. I found a mother and daughters who were running a boarding school, and they would return music. Well, we don't know whether they were borrowing it for themselves or for use with their pupils. You don't know who ended up opening the book and performing from it, even if you know whose name it was borrowed in.
Okay, well, that's great. Well, thank you very much for that.
You're welcome. Yeah.
It was fascinating, and certainly for someone who doesn't have anything much to do with music, I've certainly never catalogued a score. That was really illuminating, so thank you very much indeed. Okay, so we're going to have a slightly short